Hi, Sugar. This is Ballad, Songbirds, and Snakes, Suzanne Collins' Hunger Games novel, and we're on chapter 23, which is page 351 to page 368 today. Love you, Sugar. I do over and over again. A shiver ran down Coriolanus' spine, and he could sense the rest of the recruits stirring. Run, run, little, run. The cry built and then seemed to engulf him, bouncing off the trees and attacking him from behind. For a moment he thought he'd gone mad. He disobeyed orders and whipped his head around, almost expecting to see an army of all Arlos breaking through the teeming woods behind him. Nothing, no one. Then the voice came again from a branch a few feet above him. Run, run, little, run. At the sight of the small black bird, he flashed back to Dr. Gall's lab, where he'd seen the same creatures perched at the top of a cage. Jabberjays. Why, the woods must be full of the things, mimicking Arlo's death cry as they had the wails of the Avoxes in the lab. Run, run, little, run, little, run. Run, little, run. As Coriolanus turned back to attention, he could see the disruption the birds had caused in the back row of recruits, although the rest of the peacekeepers stood unaffected. Used to it by now, Coriolanus thought. He was not sure he'd ever be used to the refrain of someone's death cry. Even now it was transforming, changing from Arlo's speech into something almost melodic. A string of notes that mirrored the inflection of his voice, somehow more haunting than the words had been. Out in the crowd, the peacekeepers had the women, Lil, and were carrying her away. She gave one last wail of despair, and the birds picked that up as well, first as a voice, and then as part of the arrangement. Human speech had vanished, and what remained was a musical chorus of Arlo and Little's exchange. Mockingjays, grumbled a soldier in front of him. Stinking mutts. Coriolanus remembered talking to Lucy Gray before the interview. Well, you know what they say, the show's not over until the Mockingjay sings. The Mockingjay? Really, I think you're just making these things up. Not that one. A Mockingjay's a bona fide bird, and it sings in your show. Not my show, sweetheart. Yours. The Capitol's, anyway. This must be what she meant. The Capitol show was the hanging. The Mockingjay, some sort of bona fide bird. Not a jabberjay, different somehow. A regional thing, he supposed. But that was strange, because the soldier had called them mutts. His eyes strained to try and isolate one in the foliage. Now that he knew what he was looking for, he found several jabberjays. Perhaps the Mockingjays were identical, but no, wait, there. A little higher up, a blackbird slightly larger than the jabberjays suddenly opened its wings to reveal two patches of dazzling white as it lifted its beak in song. Coriolanus felt sure he spotted his first Mockingjay, and he disliked the thing on sight. The bird's song unsettled the audience, and whispers turned to mutters, which turned to objections as the peacekeepers shoved Lil into the van that had brought Arlo. Coriolanus felt afraid of this mob's potential. Were they about to turn on the soldiers? Unbidden, he felt his thumb release the safety on his gun. A volley of bullets made him jump, and he looked for bleeding bodies, but only saw one of the officers lowering his gun. The officer laughed and nodded to the commander. Having just fired into the trees and caused the flock of birds to take flight, among them, Coriolanus could make out a dozen pairs of flashing black and white wings. The gunfire subdued the crowd, and he could see the peacekeepers waving them out, shouting, "Back to work, and show's over." As the field emptied, he continued to stand at attention, hoping no one had noticed his jumpiness. And then they'd all pile onto the truck to head back to the base, the major said. I should have warned you about the birds. What are they exactly? Asked Coriolanus. The major snorted. A mistake, if you ask me. A mutation? Coriolanus persisted. Of a kind. Well, it's them and their offspring, the major said. After the war, the capital let all the jabberjay mutts loose to die out, and they should have, too, all being male. But they had an eye for the local mockingbirds, and the birds seemed willing enough. Now we've got these Mockingjay freaks to deal with. In a few years, all the jabberjays will be gone, and we'll see if the new ones can mate with one another. Coriolanus did not want to spend the next 20 years listening to them serenade the local executions. Perhaps, if he ever did become an officer, he could organize a hunting party to clear the woods of them. But why wait? Why not suggest it now, for the recruits, as a form of target practice? Surely no one liked the birds. The idea made him feel a bit better. He turned to Sejanus to tell him of his plan, but Sejanus' face was as gloomy as it had been in the capital. What's wrong? Sejanus kept his eyes on the woods as the truck pulled out. I really didn't think this through. What do you mean? Asked Coriolanus, but Sejanus only shook his head. Back on base, they returned their guns and were unexpectedly free until supper at 5. As soon as they changed back into fatigue, Sejanus mumbled something about writing to Ma and disappeared. Coriolanus found a letter one of his bunkmates must have picked for him. He recognized the fine spidery hand of Pluribus Bell and boosted himself up onto his bed to read it. Much of it confirmed what Tigris had already told him, that Pluribus was at Snow's service, both selling their goods and offering temporary lodgings while they figured out their situation. But one paragraph jumped out at Coriolanus. I'm so sorry about how it all worked out for you, Casca. Highbottom's punishment seems excessive. It started me wondering. I think I mentioned that he and your father were at the stick of thieves when they were at the university. But I do remember toward the end there a row of sorts, very uncharacteristic of them. Casca was furious, saying he'd been drunk and the whole thing was meant to be a joke. And your father said he should be grateful, that he'd been doing him a favor. Your father left, but Casca stayed drinking until I closed. I asked what was wrong, but all he would say was, like moss to a flame. He was quite drunk. I suppose they patched it up eventually, but maybe not. They both went on to jobs soon after, and I didn't see them much. People move on. This snatch of a story provided the closest explanation Coriolanus had gotten yet for Dean Highbottom hating him. A row, a falling out. He knew it hadn't been patched up, unless another had succeeded it, because of the bitter way the Dean had spoken about his father. What a petty little man Dean Highbottom was, still nursing his wounds over some disagreement in school. Even now, when his imagined persecutor was long dead, let it go, can't you? He thought, how can it still be of consequence? At dinner, Smiley, Beanpole, and Bug wanted to hear all about the hanging, and Coriolanus tried his best to satisfy them. His idea of using mockingjays for target practice was met with enthusiasm, and his bunkmates encouraged him to pitch it to the higher-ups. The only damper was Sejanus, who sat silent and withdrawn, pushing his tray of noodles out for public consumption. Coriolanus felt a twinge of concern. The last time Sejanus had lost his appetite, he lost his sanity as well. Later, as they mopped the mess hall, Coriolanus cornered him. What's bothering you? And don't say nothing. Sejanus sloshed his mop around the bucket of gray water. I don't know. I keep wondering what would have happened today if the crowd had gotten physical. Would we have had to shoot them? Oh, probably not, said Coriolanus, although he wondered the same thing. Probably just fire a few rounds in the air. If I'm helping to kill people in the districts, how is it any better than helping to kill them in the Hunger Games? Asked Sejanus. Coriolanus' instincts had been right. Sejanus was sliding into another ethical quagmire. What did you think it was going to be? I mean, what did you think you'd sign up for? I thought I could be a medic, confessed Sejanus. A medic, Coriolanus repeated. Like a doctor? No, that would require university training, Sejanus explained. Something more basic. Something where I could help anyone who'd been injured, capital or district, when violence breaks out. At least I wouldn't do any harm. I just don't know if I could ever kill anyone, Coro. Coriolanus felt a stab of annoyance. Had Sejanus forgotten that it was his own reckless behavior that had led to Coriolanus killing Bobbin? That his selfishness had robbed his friend of the luxury of such a statement? Then he suppressed a laugh at the thought of old Strabo Plinth, a munitions giant with a pacifist air. He could imagine the conversations that had transpired between father and son. What a waste, he thought. What a waste of a dynasty. What about in war? What about in a war, he asked Sejanus. You're a soldier, you know. I know, a war would be different, I guess, said Sejanus. I would have to be fighting for something I believed in. I would have to believe it would make the world a better place. I'd still rather be a medic, but there isn't much demand for them at the moment, it turns out. Without a war, they've got a long waiting list of people who'd like to be trained to work at the clinic. But even for that, you need a recommendation, and the sergeant doesn't want to give me one. Why not? Sounds like a perfect fit, said Coriolanus. Because I'm too good with a gun, Sejanus told him. It's true, I'm a crack shot. My father taught me from when I was tiny, and every week I had mandatory target practice. He considers it part of the family business. Coriolanus tried to process the information. Why didn't you hide it? I thought I was. In reality, I shoot much better than I do in training. I tried not to stand out, but the rest of the squad is terrible. Sejanus caught himself. Not you. Yes, me, Coriolanus laughed. Look, I think you're making too much of this. It's not like we have a hanging every day. And if it ever did come to it, just shoot to miss. But the words only fueled Sejanus. And what if that means you, or Beanpole, or Smiley end up dead? Because I didn't protect you. Oh, Sejanus. Coriolanus burst out in exasperation. You have to stop overthinking everything. Imagine every worst case scenario. That isn't going to happen. We're all going to die right here of old age or excessive mopping. Whatever takes us first. In the meantime, quit hitting the target, or invent a problem with your eyes, or smash your hand in the door. Stop being so self-indulgent, in other words, said Sejanus. Well, so dramatic anyway. That's how you ended up in the arena, remember? Asked Coriolanus. Sejanus reacted as if Coriolanus had slapped him. After a moment, though, he nodded in recognition. That's how I almost got us both killed. You're right, Coro. Thanks, I'm going to think over what you said. A thunderstorm ushered Saturday in, leaving behind a thick layer of mud and air to heavy Coriolanus felt an air so heavy Coriolanus felt he could wring it out like a sponge. He'd begun to crave the salty food Cookie favored and cleaned his plate at every meal. The effects of the daily training on the body left him stronger, more flexible, and confident. He'd be a match for the locals, even if they spent the day mining. Not that the hand-to-hand combat seemed likely, not with the Peacekeeper's arsenal, but he'd be ready if it happened. During target practice, he kept one eye on Sejanus, whose aim seemed a bit off. Good. A sudden reduction in his skills would draw attention. Another boy's estimation of his talent might be suspect, but he'd never known Sejanus to brag. If he said he was a crack shot, no doubt he was, which meant he'd be a real asset in the Mockingjay slaughter if he could be persuaded to try. At the end of the practice, Coriolanus pitched the idea to the sergeant and felt gratified by the answer. That might not be a bad idea. Kill two birds with one stone, he said. Oh, I hope more than two, Coriolanus joked. And the sergeant rewarded him with a grunt. After a sweltering afternoon in the laundry, shuttling fatigues in and out of the industrial washing machines and dryers, sorting and folding, Coriolanus bolted down dinner and made for the showers. Was it his imagination, or had his beard filled in? He admired it as he scraped the razor over his face. Another sign that he was leaving boyhood behind. He towel-dried his hair, relieved that his buzz had become less severe. Here and there, he can coax a bit of wave. The promise of a band at the Hob that night filled the bathroom with excitement. Apparently, none of the recruits had followed this year's Hunger Games. Some girls go to be singing there. Yeah, from the Capitol. No, not from the Capitol. She went there for the Hunger Games. Oh, guess she won. Their faces shiny with heat and scrubbing, Coriolanus and his bunkmates headed out into the evening. The guard on duty told them to keep their heads up as they left the base. I guess the five of us could take on some miners, said Beanpole, glancing around. Hand to hand, sure, said Smiley. But what if they had guns? They can't have guns here, can they? Asked Beanpole. Not legally, but there's got to be some of them floating around out there after the war. Hidden under floorboards and in trees and things. You can get anything if you have money, Smiley said with a knowing nod. Which clearly none of them do, said Sejanus. Being off the base on foot made Coriolanus edgy too, but he put it down to the mess of emotions he was experiencing. He was by turns thrilled, terrified, cocksure, and madly insecure about seeing Lucy Gray. There were so many things he wanted to say to her, so many questions he wanted to ask, and he didn't know where he'd begin. Maybe it was just another of those long, slow kisses. After about 20 minutes, they arrived at the Hob, a warehouse for coal, and in better days, reduced production had left it abandoned. Probably someone in the Capitol owned it, if not the Capitol itself, but no oversight or upkeep was apparent. Along the walls, a few makeshift stalls displayed odds and ends, much of them second-hand. Among the offerings, Coriolanus saw everything from candle stubs to dead rabbits, homemade woven sandals to cracked eyeglasses. He worried that in the wake of the hanging they would be treated with hostility, but no one seemed to give them a second glance, and much of the clientele had come from the base. Smiley, who had wheeled and dealed in the black market back home, strategically sacrificed one cookie to sampling, breaking it into a dozen pieces and allowing taste to people he deemed likely buyers. Ma's magic hit home, and between direct trade with the bootleggers and money from other interested parties, they ended up in possession of a quart bottle of clear liquid so potent the smell made their eyes water. Ooh, that's good stuff, Smiley promised. They call it white liquor here, but it's your basic moonshine. They each took one swig, provoking a round of coughing and backslapping, and saved the rest for the show. Still in possession of a half dozen popcorn balls, Coriolanus asked about tickets, but people waved him off. They don't take their pay till after, said one man. Better get a seat if you want a good one, expecting a crowd. The girl's back. Getting a seat involved grabbing an old crate, spool, or plastic bucket from a pile in the corner and staking out a spot where you could see the stage, which was no more than an arrangement of wooden pallets on one end of the hob. Coriolanus chose one against the wall, about halfway back. In the dusky light, Lucy Gray would be hard-pressed to notice him, and he wanted that. He needed them to decide how to approach her. Had she heard he was here? Likely not, for who would have told her? Around the base, he was merely gent, and his exploits in the Hunger Games caused no mention. Nightfall came, and someone flipped a switch, kicking on a hodgepodge of lights strung together by an ancient cable and several suspicious-looking extension cords. Coriolanus looked for the nearest exit in anticipation of the inevitable fire. With the old wooden structure and the coal dust, a stray spark could turn it into an inferno in a flash, like that. The hob began to fill with a mix of peacekeepers and locals, mostly men, but with a fair number of women as well. There must have been close to 200 assembled in all when a skinny boy of about 12, in a hat adorned with colorful feathers, came out and set up a single microphone on the stage, running a cord to a black box off to the side. He dragged a wooden crate behind the mic and retreated to an area blocked with a raggedy blanket. His appearance had set off something in the crowd, and people began to clap in unison, in a manner that proved contagious. Even Coriolanus found his hands joining in. Voices called for the show to begin, and just when it seemed it never would, the side of the blanket flipped back, and out stepped a little girl in a pink swirl of a dress. She gave a curtsy. The audience cheered as the girl began to beat on a drum that hung from a strap around her neck, and to dance her way to the microphone. Hoo, Maud Ivory, hooted a peacekeeper near Coriolanus, and he knew this was the cousin Lucy Gray had mentioned, the one who could remember every song she heard. It was a big claim for such a young thing. She couldn't be more than 8 or 9. She hopped on the box set behind the microphone and gave the audience a wave. Hey everybody, thanks for coming out tonight. Is it hot enough for you? She said in a sweet, squeaky voice, and the crowd laughed. Well, we're planning on heating things up a sight more. My name's Maud Ivory, and I'm pleased to introduce the Covey. The crowd applauded, and she bobbed curtsies until they quieted enough for her to start the introductions. On mandolin, Tam Amber, a tall, raw-boned young man in a feathered hat, came from behind the curtain, strumming an instrument similar to a guitar, but with a body more like a teardrop. He walked straight to Maud Ivory's side, not acknowledging the audience in any way, his fingers moving easily over the strings. Next, the boy who set up the microphone appeared with a violin. That's Clerk Carmine on the fiddle, announced Maud Ivory as he played his way across the stage, and Barb Azor on bass, hauling out an instrument that looked like a huge version of the fiddle. A willowy young woman in an ankle-length checkered blue dress gave the crowd a shy wave as she joined the others. And now, fresh from her engagement in the Capitol, the one, the only, Lucy Gray Baird. Coriolanus held his breath as she spun onto stage, guitar in one hand, the ruffles of her acid green dress flaring out around her. Her features brightened with makeup. The crowd rose to their feet. She ran lightly over as Tam Amber scooted Maud Ivory's box back and took center stage before the mic. Hey there, District 12, did you miss me? She grinned as they roared in response. I bet you never expected to lay eyes on me again, and that goes both ways. But I'm back, I'm sure I'm back. Encouraged by his mates, a peacekeeper sheepishly approached the stage and handed her a half-filled bottle of white liquor. Well, what's this? Is that for me? She asked, receiving the bottle. The peacekeeper made a gesture indicating it was from the group. Now you all know I stopped drinking when I was 12. A big laugh came from the audience. What, I did, of course. There's no harm in having some on hand for medicinal purposes. Thank you kindly. I do appreciate it. She considered the bottle, then shot the audience a knowing look and took a swig. To clear my pipe, she said innocently in response to the howls. Woo-hoo! You know, as bad as you treat me, I don't know why I keep coming back. But I do. Reminds me of that old song. Lucy Gray strummed her guitar once and looked around at the rest of the covey, who were gathered in a close half circle around the mic. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, pretty birds, a 1, a 2, and a 3, and the music began, bright and upbeat. Cornelius felt his heel tapping out the beat, even before Lucy Gray leaned into the mic. She sang, my heart's stupid, and that's not maybe. Can't blame Cupid, he's just a baby. Shoot it, boot it, execute it. Still comes a-crawling to you who. Heart's gone funny, it won't hear reason. You're like honey, you bring the bees in. Sting it, ring it, give a fling. It still comes a-crawling to ya. I wish it mattered that you chose to smash it up. How come you shattered that thing I love with? Did you feel flattered that you could just trash it up? That's why you battered that thing I love with. Lucy Gray relinquished the mic, allowing Clerk Carmine to step up and do some fancy finger work on his fiddle, embellishing the melody while the others backed him up. Coriolanus couldn't take his eyes off Lucy Gray's face, lit up like he'd never seen it before. That's her when she's happy, he thought. She's beautiful. Beautiful in a way anyone could see, not just him. That could be a problem. Jealousy pricked his heart. But no, she was his girl, wasn't she? He remembered the song she'd sung in the interview about the guy who'd broken her heart and examined the covey for a likely suspect. There was only Tam Amber with the mandolin, but there were no sparks flying between them. One of the locals, maybe. The crowd applauded Clerk Carmine, and Lucy Gray took over again. Lucy Gray sang, trap my ticker, but haven't freed it. People snicker at how you treat it. Snare it, tear it, strip it bare. It still comes a-crawling to you-hoo. Heart's been jumping just like a rabbit. Blood keeps pumping, but that's just habit. Drain it, paint it. I'm insane it. Still come a-crawling to ya. Burn it, spurn it, don't return it. Break it, bake it, overtake it. Wreck it, deck it, what the heck it. Still comes a-crawling to you-hoo, she sang. After the applause and a fair amount of hollering, woo-hoo, the audience settled down to listen some more. As Coriolanus knew from helping Lucy Gray rehearse in the Capitol, the Covey had a wide and varied repertoire and played straight instrumental numbers as well. At times, some of the members would exit, disappearing behind the blanket to leave the stage to a pair or a solo performer. Tam Amber proved something of a standout on his mandolin, riveting the crowd with his lightning-fast fingering while his face remained expressionless and distant. Maud Ivory, a crowd favorite, piped out a darkly funny song about a miner's daughter who drowned and invited the audience members to join in the chorus, which surprisingly many of them did. Or maybe it was not that surprising, given that most were companionably drunk now. Oh my darling, oh my darling, oh my darling, Clementine, you are lost and gone forever. Dreadful sorry, Clementine. Some of the numbers bordered on unintelligible, with unfamiliar words that Coriolanus struggled to get the gist of, and he remembered Lucy Gray saying that they were from another time. During these in particular, the five Covey seemed to turn in on themselves, swaying and building complicated harmonies with their voices. Coriolanus didn't care of it. The sound unsettled him, and he sat through at least 3 songs of this kind before he realized it reminded him of the Mockingjays. Fortunately, most of the songs were newer and more to his liking, and they finished up with the one he recognized from the Reapin'. The song goes, no, sir, nothing you can take from me is worth dirt. Take it, 'cause I'd give it free. It won't hurt. Nothing you could take from me was ever worth keeping. The irony of which was not lost on the audience. The Capitol had tried to take everything from Lucy Gray and had utterly failed. When the applause died out, she gave Maud Ivory a nod. The girl ran behind the blanket and appeared carrying a basket woven with cheerful ribbons. Thank you kindly, said Lucy Gray. Now you all know how this works. We don't charge for tickets because sometimes hungry people need music the most. But we get hungry too. So if you'd like to contribute, Maud Ivory will be around with the basket. We thank you in advance. The 4 older Coveys softly played while Maud Ivory scampered around the crowd, collecting coins in her basket. Between the 5 of them, Coriolanus and his bunkmates only had a few coins, which didn't seem nearly enough, though Maud Ivory thanked them with a polite courtesy. Hold on, said Coriolanus. Do you like sweets? He lifted a flap of the brown paper package with the last of the popcorn balls so Maud Ivory could take a peek. and her eyes widened with delight. Coriolanus set them all in the basket as they'd been earmarked for the tickets anyway. If he knew Ma, more boxes were on their way. Maude Ivory did a little pirouette in thanks, hurried through the rest of the audience, and then ran up on stage to tug on Lucy Gray's skirt, showing her the treats in the basket. Coriolanus could see Lucy Gray's lips make an ooh sound and ask where they'd come from. He knew this was the moment, and found himself taking a step out of the shadows. His body tingled in anticipation as Maude Ivory lifted her hand to point him out. What would Lucy Gray do? Would she acknowledge him, ignore him? Would she even recognize him, made over as he was as a peacekeeper? Her eyes followed Maude Ivory's finger until they landed on him. A look of confusion crossed her face, then recognition, and then joy. She shook her head in disbelief and laughed. Okay, everybody, this is maybe the best night of my life. Thanks to everybody here for showing up. How about one more song to send you off to sleep? You might have heard me do this before, but it took on a whole new meaning for me in the Capitol. Guess you'll figure out why. Coriolanus moved back to his seat. She knew where to find them now. To listen and to savor their actual reunion, which was only a song away. His eyes teared up, and then she began the song from the zoo. She sang, down in the valley, valley so low, late in the evening, hear the train blow. The train, love, hear the train blow. Late in the evening, hear the train blow. Coriolanus felt an elbow nudge his ribs and looked over to see Sejanus beaming at him. It was nice, after all, to have someone else who knew the significance of the song, someone who knew what they'd been through. The song continued, go build me a mansion, build it so high, so I can see my true love go by. See him go by, love, see him go by, so I can see my true love go by. That's me, Coriolanus wanted to tell people around him. I'm her true love, and I saved her life. It continues, go write me a letter, send it by mail, bake it and stamp it to the Capitol Jail. Capitol Jail, love to the Capitol Jail. Bake it and stamp it to the Capitol Jail. Should he say hello first or just kiss her? Roses are red, love, violets are blue. Birds in the heavens, no, I love you. Kiss her, definitely just kiss her. No, I love you. Oh, I know I love you, she sang. Birds in the heavens, no, I love you. Good night, everybody. Hope we see you next week. Until then, keep singing your song, said Lucy Gray, and the whole covey took one final bow. As the audience applauded, she smiled at Coriolanus. He began to move toward her, stepping around, people collecting their makeshift seats to pile back in the corner. A few of the peacekeepers had gathered around her, and she chatted with them. But he could see her eyes darting his way. He paused to give her time to extricate herself, and just to bask in the sight of her, glowing and in love with him. The peacekeepers were bidding her good night, starting to back away. Coriolanus smoothed his hair and moved in. They were only about 15 feet apart when the disturbance in the hob, the sound of glass breaking and voices protesting, caused him to turn his head. A dark-haired young man around his age, dressed in a sleeveless shirt and pants ripped off at the knees, pushed through the thinning crowd. His face gleamed with sweat, and his movements suggested he exceeded his white liquor limit some time ago. Over one shoulder hung a boxy instrument with part of a piano keyboard along one side. Behind him trailed the mayor's daughter, Mayfair, taking care not to brush against the patrons, her mouth tight with disdain. Coriolanus shifted his gaze to the stage, where a cold, fixed stare had replaced Lucy Gray's eager expression. The other members of the band drew in around her protectively, their showtime levity draining away into a mix of raw anger and sadness. It's him, Coriolanus thought with dead certainty. His stomach twisted unpleasantly. It's the lover from the song. Alright, that's the end of chapter 23 of The Battle of Songbirds and Snakes from Suzanne Collins' Hunger Games novel. We'll continue on page 369, chapter 24 tomorrow. Love you, sugar. Bye-bye.